Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, guys, I have a podcast due, and so here we are. I'm going to ad-lib this one a little bit. I was thinking about doing I'm going to do a golf one. I wore my golf polo today, and I just got a new set of clubs for my wife, and so we went to the range and went hitting. And this end of the season, I'd got a new set of clubs, and so I'm still trying to get used to hitting those, and having some challenges a little bit. So I thought it would be an interesting podcast topic to talk about new equipment and using new equipment and preparing for and kind of putting a system together for being effective with equipment acquisition. And I think a lot of times it's so common for us as consumers to make the assumption that all that is required is the purchase. And that's not the case. And I just want to go through that. We're going to do a couple parallels and maybe dive into, some of those things that we just really need to understand and be good at to use, new equipment, especially when it comes to this hunting business. So, all right. So as far as the golf stuff goes, like where I've really been struggling is, added a couple new clubs to the routine, new driver, stiffer shaft, different loft angle, still using my loft irons. And so those still working exactly the same as they always have, pretty good. And so, I've just been thinking, why is the change from, a 9 to a 6 iron, such a struggle? Why am I having to learn how to swing this 6 iron and not getting the results that I'm wanting? And in specifically where I seem to struggle is on the lower numbered clubs, is getting my club head speed up high enough and keeping it under control. And so I've just been trying to self-diagnose and self-teach and kind of go through, what's different? How do I set up differently? How do I make it work differently? And, I'm making a little bit of progress, but not fast enough. I decided today that I wanted to maybe go back to some fundamentals, go grab, a little video series, get some outside perspective, and just work on it to make progress. And I saw kind of that where that came from was I didn't seem to be improving, over the past, 5-6 weeks as much as I wanted to. And, with my wife, she is absolutely a novice golfer. She's a left-hander. She's trying to swing right-handed. It's the way she hit softballs when she was growing up. And so we got some stuff to overcome there. And she's a small, petite gal, not super athletic. And so, I feel like getting some club head speed out of her is going to be one of the big challenges. And, but I worked with her today, and we went from, the normal to, by the end, she was getting under the ball. Her form was looking good. It was more consistent, and we just kept fixing things that she was doing wrong. I got out the camera and showed her, and she has a couple weird little picadillies that we were trying to stomp out. But she had massive improvement in one session just by having a little bit of a coach or having some direction in, how to change. And just, I want to tie that back to some gun stuff. We've got some guys we work with that are just absolute killers. We try to keep them flush in guns and technology and gear. And we get a couple things out of that. I mean, they'll promote the brand a little bit, and our brand's attached to their success in some ways, but they're also really hard on stuff. And I think we get a lot of value in real application, real use of product, and the product testing and feedback that comes from that. So the guys are deep into it, and what I find every year I think everybody's working really hard, so they don't take as much time to prepare, but the day before, the night before, the week before hunting season, we're getting calls, and it's, hey, my gear this, or I have this thing. And so we'll work them through it. We'll fix it up. And just, there's a little education piece that comes with that. And there's some basic fundamental stuff that it's surprising to me, but not everybody's like on top of the rifle game and their equipment game to where it's second nature. And sometimes I got to step back and say, oh yeah, maybe they're like me golfing. They need just a little bit of instruction or a little pointers or a refresher on, slipping a turret to zero, checking a trajectory profile, to make sure that, your ballistics are all matching up. So in this case, these guys are using a factory ammunition, not ours, just another brand they're working with. And they had a couple different lots of ammo. They didn't have chronographs, and they understand the concept of truing. I don't know that they're super experts at it. Again, not having a chronograph's an indicator. And then we put all this technology on top of not just the gun, but the rest of it. And so a couple things that are misnomers there that I felt like were leading us down bad paths was, my impacts are low, therefore my trajectory must be wrong, or the zero's not right, or etc. And so I think maybe just we'll cover a couple pointers about that as you guys are getting ready for, hunting, or you're in the thick of hunting and maybe something comes up you need to troubleshoot. Let's talk just a little bit about, trajectories and ballistics and ballistic profiles. For smart devices, you should have a ballistic app on your phone. Hopefully you're running the Revic app. It's free. It works really good. It's got a lot of great features in and a lot of great features planned. You also should have a smart rangefinder. I don't know that there's really any reason to not have a smart rangefinder, and I am all about a combination device. So I'm talking smart rangefinder plus binocular, right? And a smart rangefinder is not just taking range, it's also doing ballistics, which implies it's got a weather station and a way to get shot vector measurements, azimuth and incline. So if you look at that technology stack and then put a modern precision rifle scope on there, now you could have a non-raising scope or a scope that's got a zero stop. There's a little bit of complexity there. First focal plane, second focal plane, a couple other things there. Go to ammo, and you've got the ammunition's performance, which is bullet plus muzzle velocity, and you're looking at bullet ballistic coefficient and its consistency, which, the big guys are doing a great job on consistency. They're working great. But then we look at powder, and in the world today, like, powder is a super big problem. I have a hard time being super critical of a company that's doing the best to put out good product, but might be hampered by supply chain. But if you look at powder, like, the world has changed, and a lot of our super temperature stable stuff is not as available. Like, there's challenges there. So sometimes we're running powders that aren't quite as stable, and then sometimes you have to switch powder supply or powder type, and you can't achieve the same velocity. So you're going to get some lot variation as well. So if you're looking at general factory ammo, you could see 100 feet per second difference in your average muzzle velocity. So this is a parameter that you want to know is, what's my average for this lot number? And then the second thing that's very interesting to understand is, what is my extreme spread? And a lot of guys like boil this down to SD, but I like to think of it, well, what if that one weird shot was a $25,000, $40,000 sheep hunt, right? So that was just one instance of a problem is a problem, even though statistically, it's not likely that you're going to see it if you have a low SD. So I like to look at that extreme spread value, and you can think of it as a plus or minus from a nominal. So let's say you got a 40 feet per second extreme spread. You've got an average muzzle velocity of 2960. So you could be 3,000 at the one range, and you could be 2920 at the other range. So I like to go in on my ballistic calculator and plug in, the 2960, and then go plug in the 3,000 and see, well, how big of a difference does that make at, say, my hunting range of 700 yards or 1,000 yards, depending on what you're hunting and where you're hunting. But understanding what that extreme spread does and the sensitivity that's there, if you've got a 40 foot per second extreme spread, that's a lot. It's not unusable. If you got 100 feet per second extreme spread, that's getting into the unusable range. A factory ammo with a 20 to 25 foot per second extreme spread is rare. That is a very good number to get. You'll see some hand load guys out there touting single digit extreme spread or low SDs. You can do that hand loading. Sometimes it's not hunting ammo, but you can do that. But go do a little sensitivity analysis, see if that matters. But so the main thing you got to realize, you got to know your ballistic coefficient, you got to know your average muzzle velocity, and then just double check your extreme spread as a usable value. The last thing that you need to pay attention to, especially with lower cost factory ammo, is it's not going to be temperature stable, which means the speed is going to change as the temperature changes. And so when you're trying to troubleshoot a gun or you're trying to set up your ballistic profile, true it, you have to take this into consideration. In the Revic app, there is a powder factor that you can apply for different powders, and I think we've got a chart in there that'll give you some guidance. And it's easy to do yourself. You throw some stuff in the freezer, you put some stuff out in the sun. If you got 100 degrees temperature difference, and you get 100 feet per second difference in average muzzle velocity for say like 5 shots, then that would tell you have 1 foot per second per degree of temperature change. And that's actually not bad for a lot of powders. There's powders that are worse. We're looking for powders that are less than half of that to be used in our long range hunting. But if you understand how to use this powder factor, the smart devices can mitigate a lot of that. So what that means is when you set up a range session and you shoot your data, you measure, a half dozen rounds on the chronograph, and you get 2950 average muzzle velocity. For, let's say it's a H1000 and it's got a low powder factor, say 0.2. I'd have to look that up. I don't remember that offhand. And you would plug that number into the powder factor equation, but you also have to plug in the temperature that you collected that velocity. That's like your initial conditions. So when I measured the velocity, I need to plug in that powder factor, temperature, and collect that information. So let's say it's 50 degrees outside, I plug that in. That way the system knows that if it's 100 degrees outside, you have to take that 50 degrees times your powder factor, and then it will increase your muzzle velocity for that calculation set, for that solution. So it's really cool. It's really handy for muzzleloaders when you're hunting, early August temperatures, and then you might be doing some late season in November, December. That'd be like Colorado, Nebraska. That sometimes those powders will move 150 feet per second. And if this corrects for that, then it helps you get the right ballistic solution very easily. So the powder factor is one thing that you can look at. So you've got your average speed, you've got your temperature sensitivity baked in there, and your initial condition temperature. You've got your BC in there. And I think a lot of guys still don't follow that ballistic coefficient is variable based on your gun. Go read Hornaday's white paper. Like even your muzzle brake can have an effect on the performance of that bullet downrange. So what we really like to do is we like to take a profile, a G7 or a Doppler profile, and then we like to offset that profile for the performance of that bullet out of your gun. And so we call that trajectory validation. So if you do the muzzle velocity work on a chronograph, we're using Garmin, it's great. If you've got a magnetospeed, that's great. An Oler, that's great. Lab radar, we use those quite a bit. You get good values from those. I don't like the older, cheaper light screen ones, so generally I'd recommend stay away from those. But if you run a Garmin, just keep it in your gun case. That's so handy to have. So you got a Garmin, you measure your velocities. That data, we assume, is set. And so the variable that we can adjust is your ballistic coefficient. So pick a G7 profile. Here's like a 0.347. We're going to shoot and zero. So shoot a closer range, and then we're going to shoot a longer range, measure the drop, and we're going to brute force true the profile to that BC. And so to do that, you need to have your powder factors in. You need to put your earth-based effects on. You need to do aero jump, your wind. If you're shooting in wind, it's easier just to shoot north and shoot with no wind and eliminate those variables. But if not, you need to turn all those things on. You collect that drop information, you plug it into the Revic app, and it will true for you that ballistic coefficient. So when you're troubleshooting a rifle, you can adjust your muzzle velocity, you can adjust your BC, and you can adjust your zero. Those are basically your three things that you can manipulate. And when you're shooting a gun to troubleshoot it, what I always hate is somebody says, okay, I shot 600 yards and I was 2 minutes low. And then they want to extrapolate from that an outcome or a result and get some information from me on how to correct it. And I think what's really important is to understand, how to diagnose a trajectory or a zeroing problem. So the way I go about it is I will start out at my zero range, which is usually around 100 yards. So I'll shoot a couple there. And then I will go to an intermediate to far range, say like 400 to 600 yards. I will shoot there. And then I will shoot a longer range. It's like 800 to 1,000 yards, and I will shoot there. And if every one of those ranges is offset by the same amount, then that teaches you have a zeroing problem. If the amount changes, the point of impact changes and increases or decreases over that same distance, then that would indicate that you have a trajectory problem. And this is an angular amount. So let's say you're right on at 100, you're 2 minutes low at 400, and then you're like 4 minutes low at 800. What that tells you is that your bullet's trajectory is actually a lot slower, or the BC is a lot worse than what you think. And so if you're shooting and you see an indication, let's say you're shooting at 600 yards and you hit low, you need to check an other range, right? Shoot a big enough sample that you really can tell you're low. So 5 shots, right? So you measure with your reticle, what is the amount that I'm low or high? And let's say the reticle says you're 1 minute low. And then you need to pick a closer range. So why not go back to your zero? Just pick something that's in that 100 to 200 yard range, make your adjustment correctly, either zeroed on the turret or the correct adjustment, and then shoot that range and shoot a statistically valid sample and measure that. And so if it's 1 minute low, then that is a lot of information indicating that all you need to do is just change your zero 1 minute, and it would be on at your 100 yards, and it would also be on at 600. But what if you come back to 100 and it's on, right? But you were a minute low at 600. Well, now I want to go double check at, say, like 800 or 1,000, right? And I'm gonna see what that drop is and what's different there. When you're doing that, don't always assume that your muzzle velocity or your BC is wrong. You have to make sure that your environmental conditions are correct in your calculation tool. So if you're using a rangefinder that's got a weather station in it and you leave it sitting out in the sun and it gets baked, temperature soaked, right? You get all this solar gain, and now maybe the sensor on that device is reading 120 degrees, but it's only 60 degrees outside. That's going to have a huge effect on your downrange performance. So make sure that your environmental inputs are matching, and you can force feed those things right into the Revic app, and you can calculate your drops there rather than using a smart device. But learn how to diagnose that zero. So if you shoot one and it's not right, you have to check again with another, and then very likely you're going to want to shoot a third, just so that you can understand and make the right adjustment and the right fix. Because this time of year, when it's go time and we're hunting, you don't have a lot of time to screw around, and you don't want to make the wrong choice and make a wrong adjustment. So I would say, like, learn how to diagnose a point of impact shift problem, and think about, collecting those extra couple pieces of data before you make a decision, and then take the appropriate action. So the appropriate action for a zero problem is adjust your turret, slip it, reset your zero stop if you need to, now go hunting, right? If you have a trajectory problem, the first thing that you want to do is break out a chronograph and measure your ammo. So the problem that we had this last week was, all of a sudden we were hitting wrong. We only had one piece of data, but we didn't know about the ammo, and we were shooting two different lots. So we shipped a Garmin chronograph up there. They measured, and the two lots had 100 feet per second different temperature. And so we went through and we separated those. We used one. We got an average velocity. We anchored that as a consistent. Then we plugged our BC values in, and then we went and started doing some trajectory stuff, and we got it worked out. Everything tightened up. Just make sure you understand that. Now, there's a lot of layers to this long-range shooting and smart equipment, like just we were talking about with the weather station and how you can get some solar gain. There's a really complex thing in this space, and it's called zero angle. And essentially it is dealing with initial zeroing conditions so that when you go to a new location, you don't have to check your zero, or you don't feel compelled to check your zero and make adjustments based on your new conditions. The old way of doing a ballistic solution is called zero range. And with zero range, you're basically saying, I'm on at 100. Now let's start all of our calculations based on that assumption. And what is my correction, for that shot out at distance? The problem with that is you have to know that you're zeroed, in those conditions that you're shooting at. So if you're up on the sheep mountain at 10,000 feet, and the last time you shot your gun was down at 2,000 feet at your home range, you don't know that your zero is right. In fact, it's not going to be right at 10,000 feet. So you're starting off with some little bit of error that is sometimes hard to deal with. And usually what we'll do is we show up in hunting camp, we'll check the zero, make some adjustments, and we're good to go. And usually it's a rough and dirty way to get close enough for 500, 600, 700 yard hunting distances. But if you have the potential to shoot farther, or you have some big, swings in distance, or maybe you're not able to check your zero, understanding the way that zero angle works is super important. And I can't, like, if I try to dive into that here, it'll turn our discussion too long. But we put out a couple great videos and a blog article on zero range versus zero angle and how that works. But essentially, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. When you go set your gun up and you go to the range and you shoot it and you measure all these parameters in the data, you plug that information into the Revic app when you're building your profile, and you find the zero angle. And what you'll do is you put your parameters in, and it will calculate what that initial zero angle is. And that zero angle represents the mechanical relationship between the sight and your rifle system, and how your bullet performs in one full set of conditions. So that's everything: environmentals, shot vector, everything. So once you have that singular data point in time, we can calculate what that effective mechanical relationship is between your scope and your gun, and we call that zero angle. And if you start with that zero angle and never change that mechanical relationship in your gun, we can calculate and predict the effect of going into a different set of shooting conditions, and we can solve for that so that now, even though your point of impact might move a half minute to a minute at 200 yards, you don't have to adjust your zero, because the solvers in the Revic smart devices or the app, they're going to account for those initial conditions and give you the right correction at 800 or 900 yards. So it's a very sophisticated, like very nuanced tool set that's there. And I don't think very many people are using it, even though it is very significant in, becoming more proficient and more capable as a long-range shooter. So I think there's that issue. One that we run into is slipping the turret on your gun. It's like these non-raising turrets are very confusing in the way they work. The raising turrets are a lot more straightforward in conceptual thinking. So just understanding how to zero your turret, you get up into a hunting camp, it's like you got the tool you need. Do you know what the step-by-step instructions are to do it? It's like, this would be something that would be worth putting in a little toolkit, is just simple instructions on how to re-zero that scope. So I think that one's very basic, very simple. I think the trajectory validation stuff is a little bit more complex, and then zero angle gets very complex. Another one that comes up is syncing your profile from the app to the device. I had somebody that I was troubleshooting with the other day that was trying to store the profile into the cloud, and that cloud storage icon, with the arrow in the cloud, they were confusing that with the sync icon where you connect and manage profiles and send to a device. So even just something simple like understanding how to load profiles on your device, how to check that. I've seen that even in just the last week, and had to troubleshoot with somebody. And I think, hunting season creates all sorts of rush and all sorts of last minute preparations, and I'm guilty of that 100%. But I think making sure that we're comfortable with our equipment, with our range sessions and our practice sessions. And I heard somewhere that it takes you about 15 sessions with a new set of clubs before they start fitting in. I'll bet that is a good number to use for a new set of shooting equipment, technology, etc. Is get those sessions in, do the exercises, familiarize yourself with procedures, and where you need to, just make some notes, write it down, make a quick cheat card, laminate it, stick it in your toolkit that goes in your backpack. It's not going to weigh anything. And then it's there if you need it, to refresh your memory, to give you some pointers on, either how to troubleshoot or how to adjust your system when you're out in the field and you need it. I mean, we're available by phone, but if you don't have phone service, that doesn't do you any good when you're out there. So a couple quick pointers, concept about, getting familiar with equipment and understanding how to troubleshoot. And, guys, it doesn't hurt to take a class. We've got a great refresher course here at Gunwerks called the Equipment Readiness. A lot of guys come out here and do just a quick tune-up with their equipment before they'll go hunting. It's a one-day class. I think you bring your gun and your ammo, and it's like a $500 a day class, and we'll put you in some good situations. We'll give you a good refresher on everything. There's a lot of value with that. Or go shooting with your buddy that's the expert that just eats and breathes this stuff. But make sure you're getting good information, and make sure you're comfortable with equipment before you go out in the field. You get in that stressful situation where you have to make that shot because you have so much invested in it. And I think that's some good pointers from the Gunwerks side. Hopefully your success this fall is great. And I'm going to take my own advice. I'm going to break my gun out tomorrow, get a little shooting in, and make sure that thing's ready to go for the elk hunt this weekend. Thank you.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram, or send us an email to podcast@gunwerks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunwerks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.